Well, here's a simple one. So if now we have our bitch bred and we've gone through all of the things that we've previously talked about the stud dog. So when should we start checking for viability, and when's the best time to do whatever you recommend?
So, okay, palpation. Palpation in some breeds is really easy, like Salukis. If you have a really cooperative Saluki, you can probably palpate puppies at 3, 21, 22 days. Sometimes in our dogs, in fact, we did one today who's like, from her first breeding, she's 22 days. I'm pretty sure I can feel something. I'm not completely sure. Probably if I did an ultrasound, I could catch them. The best time or my favorite time to ultrasound is 28 to 35 days. That said, if I have a bitch in the practice that I think is losing her puppies before that, we'll do it sooner than that. Sometimes too, these dogs will be funky, for lack of a better medical term, off their food, have a little more discharge than I'd like after a breeding. And I think, oh no, she's got a PIO, and I'll do an ultrasound at like 21, 22 days and she's pregnant, which probably means she's just having a really ugly morning sickness type trend. So that's usually my favorite time is 24 to 35 days. From 35 to 50 days, you can do an ultrasound, but you don't see, you don't get good puppy counts, and everybody's curious about puppy counts. And so that's why we try not to do it then. We have a problem in pregnancy, we ultrasound them every week. We also use ultrasounds to help determine that, yeah, even though her progesterone hasn't dropped, or she's only 57 days, that the puppies really look like they're mature enough to take. And there's some signs in the ultrasound that can kind of help you with that, like liquid in the gallbladder, liquid in the stomach, liquid in the bladder. Also, if you can see tubercles, so in the kidneys, if you can see a little tree-like substance that is where the little kidneys getting its little tubules, that almost always means that the puppies are ready. We also check heartbeats. So if heartbeats are 150 or less, you need to really think about getting the puppies out. So that's something too. My favorite time to do pregnancy x-rays, which if you're free whelping and you're not real experienced with it, you don't know if she has 6 or 10, the x-ray is really handy for that. So you know if she has 6, she's not done because there's at least 10 in there. That said, it's not an exact count. Once there's 8, 10, 12 puppies in there, you can't count them all the time. They start to wrap around each other. Also, when we do pregnancy x-rays in the practice, we do a vaginal exam. So that way, if they obviously have a vaginal stricture, then I can say, you know what, if a puppy comes through this, it's going to have a tough time. And I think there's a good chance they're going to need a C-section. It's not an absolute. We've had bitches who have the most beautiful vaginal canal you can imagine, but they still need a C-section. But that's another thing to kind of keep in mind. So x-rays aren't 100%. X-rays are really safe. The new digital x-ray machines give off very little radiation. We don't shoot them over and over again, and we don't lay them on their back for a BD if they're stressed, because they can have a uterine torsion, they can have other issues, but we do like to do x-rays.
I mean, 'cause I know some of the technology is so amazing. While we're talking about ultrasound, I had a bitch last year who had a litter, and they did an x-ray and they went ahead and did an ultrasound, and the vet told me that there was some kind of deformity, some kind of monster puppy in there. And sure enough, we finally got it out, and it was terrible, but she was able to tell that from the ultrasound. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So, I feel like, don't you think maybe it could tell you other things as well with the puppies?
I've caught water babies or puppies where they have like congenital or edema, and you can tell that. Also, sometimes on the x-ray, if a dog has 2 huge puppies, it's more likely to need a C-section than if it has 4 not so huge puppies. And you can also look at skull size and pelvises. It's not 100% because there's soft tissue in there too, but it is helpful for those types of things too. We've also had with ultrasounds a couple of people, and they may be more talented than me, but be able to tell that there was a puppy stuck that's crossways between the 2 horns. And so that's been helpful too.
What about people who have home ultrasound machines?
So they can probably get pregnant or not. They're probably not going to get a lot more than that unless they've really got a good 3D point of view. Now, I'm one of those people that can get lost in a paper sack. So it took me a lot of practice to get decent at pregnancy ultrasounds, but I do think it's helpful to see like pregnant or not. And it doesn't have to be a great machine to get that, but it does take some experience. I always tell my breeder friends that if you're going to do that, then come and spend an hour for me at the vet, and you need to bring pizza for the whole staff because it's going to take a while. But I don't have any problem with it.
So far, I've been very good at finding the bladder.
And that's good though. The bladder is very similar to the puppy, but if there's something moving in the bladder, it's pregnant.
Yeah, so far,
Um,
everything's pregnant, but
but
it's really just a bladder.
Even
I
your
have
nails,
one.
that's really good.
You should name one that.
What?
Yeah, that'd be cute.
You're on mute, Doug.
Bladder? Well, name it puppy Bladder.
Yeah, name one Bladder. You can call him Blad.
Hey, I was at
saw him-
100% until I realized it was the bladder.
I happen to have one, and I like it for a couple of reasons. So,
A bladder?
and no, I mean, I have one of those.
Jenny, I actually do think it's a good tool to have. I don't, I'm very conservative in terms of not wanting to use it too often, but I do like it for a yes and no. I don't expect that I'll ever be able to count them. That's not the point. But, if you have some questions, the other thing, Becky, that I think why it's important to have, if you are home and having a natural delivery and you have 5 puppies and you wonder if there's another, you can use that wand just to say, hey, are we empty now? What's going on in there?
That's what I do.
No, I think it's a good thing to do too. And also it's just something that you're going to have to practice with. Also, I mean, ultrasound machines have come a long way in the several decades I've practiced, but I think they'll be more and more available over time too. And I think it's a good tool for that too. Just so, and you guys know this isn't the population for this, but you can only legally do pregnancy diagnosis on your own dog. If you do it on somebody else's, you're practicing veterinary medicine. So if you have one of those and your friends asked, you can't do it. So
You can assist them, maybe.
Just watch.
So
yeah,
I like
Yeah.
doing it, and I like taking pictures because if I know for sure there's someone on my list getting a puppy, they love getting those updates. So I can tell them, look, it's part of the whole experience because to them, they're only buying a dog once a decade or so. It's very exciting. Or even after the puppies come, I send it to them. They're like, look, this could have been yours, this little dark circle.
It is their
It's your
fur
baby.
baby.
This
Yes,
could have been
it
your
is.
bladder.
Call it whatever they want.
yeah.
Yes.
I
You
have
could probably
a
send them a picture
labor.
of bladder, they wouldn't know.
Pick of the litter.
Well, I have like a labor and delivery question. So let's say you have.
Oh, you're jumping
a
ahead.
mom- Oh,
It's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
I think it's just because I'm getting closer to my own labor, so I'm just like freaking out. But when it comes to dogs, like if you have, a mom who's a dam who's expecting like 8 puppies, and she's delivered 4 in a reasonable amount of time, like free whelping, and how much time do you allow to go in between like puppies? Like when is it time to worry? Like maybe I should stop waiting for her to deliver the rest of the puppies naturally. When should I consider going to the vet?
Right.
Yeah, Becky
That
is
kind
a
of
veterinarian, but I have
That's
some,
a good question.
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say Becky is the veterinarian, but I will tell you that your question is very breed specific. There are, and family specific within breeds. I have found that I had Doberman pinchers, and Dobermans would deliver 8 and 10 puppies within like an hour. You'd have to catch them and wipe them and put them down on the floor, right? You have a breed that's built somewhat like ours and who's long and delivers very big puppies for their whole size. And so then when I had corgis, they take naps between puppies, and I would panic. I would literally what's happening here, and Dr. Williams will talk more about the science of it. And so they would have, like you said, 3 or 4 puppies and take a nap for like an hour and a half, and you're like going, and then they might wake up and they have mild delivery, what's the word? I was going to say
Contractions.
contractions. Thank you. And then they stop again, and then they start again. And you're just like, should I take them? Like what you're worrying about? Should I take them to the vet, or should I not take them to the vet? So at any rate, that's something that Dr. Williams is going to answer. But and that is for the veterinarian to answer. But I will tell you, you'll grow to know your family of dogs and what the breed specific is. It's just like, here we have Lexa shaking her head yes, because she understands, like with dachshunds, and because we all kind of share something similar, even Doug with the Clummers, is that so we all have odd shaped proportional dogs, although I think a Clumber is more apt to deliver a puppy.
Well, I think you're exactly right, Bill. I do think there are breed specific traits and whelping traits. And then, just like we've been saying all night, everything about this is familiar. So familiar. So you've got your family of dogs behaving a certain way. And it sort of bridges the gap that we've been talking about for the last several months, is that, it's another component of choosing and selecting breed animals, because these problem bitches and sires are really a struggle to a breeder. Of course, generally there are better ones that are the most challenging to get pregnant, and so you have to wonder where's the worth in that? Is it worth this? Because in the long run, 3 and 4 decades later, you don't want to be fighting that same problem. Yes, they're gorgeous, but the viability is lacking. So, it is something to be mindful of.
Well, I think that what Bill said is exactly right. So like my family of dogs, if my girls do not have puppies within 2 hours, we're going in, because that's usually the plan with my vet. And that's after, like, I have to call and make sure it's okay for me to give them, a shot or anything, which I don't really like to do. But my girls can tend to have inertia because they are so low and long and get so big. And so, you have to kind of know the signs of your girls too. And mine are really tough, but some of them are kind of wussy and they'll just give up. And so when that happens, that's a problem. You can tell my girls, when they go into inertia, will start to have some green discharge, which means the placentas are starting to separate from the wall. And that is an emergency C-section, get them in. And I try to pay attention to that because my repro vet is 30 minutes away in good traffic, but they usually decide to have puppies or an emergency during rush hour. So it's trying to get in and, make sure the team's there before. So that's kind of what I have to do with my girl. And everything can be beautiful through the pregnancy and everything's perfect. And all of a sudden it's C-section time. So it just depends.
Yeah. And
Right.
I have 2 breeds that are polar opposites. Louchens, they pop them out. Like, if I had a Louchen that needed a C-section, I would seriously think about not even keeping her in the breeding program. It's just not a thing. Like, if she couldn't get pregnant, I'm like, you know what? It's not meant to be. But with Swissies, it kind of happens. You expect to miss, you expect to have some C-sections. So it's just so breed dependent. It's just so different in terms of your expectation. But Louchen, I get a puppy every 10 to 15 minutes. Swissies, I do start to get kind of antsy at 30 minutes because I know if I wait any longer, they're done.
Yeah. Okay, so sorry, Dr. Williams, we got off on this, so we're ready.
I liked it. It was good. So here's the scoop. I think that let's start with starting labor. A lot of dogs do stage 1 very dramatically, but once you definitely see pushing and they're pushing hard, and not I'm going to push for 2 minutes and then I'm going to take a nap and go outside and kill a squirrel and I'll be right back. But when they're pushing hard with just, 30 seconds to maybe 2-3 minute breaks, they should have a puppy within a couple hours of pushing. Honestly, sooner than that, but some of them aren't that graceful about it. Between puppies, once you get to 3 hours, I start getting nervous. It's not an absolute. In fact, we've jumped in the car after 3 hours to head to the vets to do our C-section, and they're born in the car. Mm-hmm. There's a certain video store on Gary Avenue that apparently my dogs really like, because genetically we've had a couple generations do that. But I think that 3 hours is about the maximum. The other thing to consider, if like they have 12 and after 2 they're taking 3-hour breaks, they're probably not going to have 12. They're going to get too exhausted or something's going to happen. So I think at that point you at least need to be prepared. Now, if they have 12, they have 2, they take a 3-hour break and then they have 6, you're probably okay. The other thing to remember too is sometimes we have dogs. I would love to C-section right here, right now, but the surgery room's busy. I don't have another surgery room and I don't have the staff for 2 hours. So for us, sometimes just because you're there doesn't mean we can stop everything and do it. I've actually called the office that I work at and say I'm on my way with a C-section, and my emergency vet says, I do anything in the world for you, but I'm on the table with the bloat and there's another one waiting. They can't do anything. There's nothing they can do. So that's something that you have to kind of be prepared or keep in mind too. But kind of we're getting in trouble is 3 hours between puppies. Or just no signs of labor when you know there's more puppies. There are some things you can do. You can do supplemental calcium at that stage and it can make a difference. You can give them a little bit of a meal in case their glucose drop back, especially if they're thin or they haven't been eating well. Sometimes if you just take them on a walk, kind of their contraction timing gets better. You should definitely take a rag with you. There's also a wheelbarrow technique where you hold them up by the back legs. When you walk them around with that, if the uterus is kind of in a knot, and it depends on your dog size, sometimes that'll relax it enough that they'll realign and they'll push.
Great.
I did have another quick question. So, what are some supplements or, things that a breeder should have in their medical bag at home? Like, what are some crucial things to have that you would recommend? You just mentioned calcium supplements or something. Like, for someone who's a beginner, what are some things that they should have stocked in their house if they, can't go to the vet right away or something?
Like a whelping kit?
Yeah.
Kind of. So
Yeah,
there's
that's a
a
great
whole
question.
list of stuff. And probably something that we should come up with a list, but and I have a list in another source. But one thing, I don't think beginners or even most breeders should have oxytocin. There's a couple reasons for that. There's a huge liability issue if, as a vet, I prescribe oxytocin to you and you use it incorrectly or it doesn't end well. So that's something to think about. So if your vet gets a little reluctant to do that, that's the reason. There's very few of my breeders that I let them have oxytocin because there's too many instances of people using it poorly. As far as calcium, when we have you, if you bring your bitch into us and we need to do an emergency C-section, we check calcium levels on our in-house machine before we do it. And if it's less than normal, we give them a calcium injection beforehand. If you bring your dog in and she's had, well, let's say she's had 9 puppies, but we know by the x-ray and the ultrasound, there's one more puppy. I can tell you that the best chance for that puppy may be to C-section it right now, but we can try to get it out. At that point, if we do a panel, the calcium's low and we give calcium, a lot of times those bitches will go ahead and have the puppy. We can do injectable in the office, but oral calcium is pretty effective. The calcium citrate that we take as women is pretty good. There's also a Calsorb gel that's real easy too. If you're desperate, Tums has calcium. It's not absorbed as well, but we give our nursing bitches Tums all the time for the calcium. So those are some things too. As far as the whole whelping kit, that's a pretty involved list, and there's some lists online that are pretty decent. But as far as supplement things, I think you need to have something to tie off umbilicus. Now, I have access to all types of wonderful suture. I still like dental floss the best. We always are prepared to and generally supplement our puppies. Corgi puppies, Bill can tell you, they're really fragile when they're born. They're determined to die. I think part of it's because they're so heavy bodied and they just don't breathe well. But it's a little bit challenging that way. I do think you need to have stuff to supplement them. I like goat's milk formulas, but a lot of times when they're first born, I like the pre-made stuff because it's ultra pasteurized, so there's no bacteria. Milk has bacteria in it. That's why milk goes sour. So that's something to think about too. I also think if you have a breed that's super fragile, you should have tube feeding supplies, even if you might have to come in to learn how to do it. I have had clients in emergencies learn how to tube feed with YouTube videos. So, I mean, sometimes it's possible, but those are some things to consider too. heat source is a big thing. More puppies die of hypothermia than die of lack of nutrition. And so those are some things too. And I tell my clients, if you don't weigh your puppies twice a day, don't call me when you have a problem, because I have no idea if you have a problem or not. So I think, and you guys all do this, it's not the general public, but you need to weigh them twice a day. Bad sick puppies, we weigh even more.
I don't understand why people don't weigh their puppies with, I mean, I do it. We do it. We're like drill sergeants with weighing, and it is the first indicator of a problem.
Mhm.
And documentation of it.
Of course.
Absolutely.
It's not right to
Right.
say, I had someone that we co-bred a litter, and I would say, well, how are the weights? How are the weights? How are the weights? And he goes, they're very full. They look full. They're always so full. And they arrived at my house so malnourished
Mhm.
and so thin, and yet they thought they were full. Well, they were not full. And without a number to it, you can't educate someone, especially when we've been doing this for 30 years. You
Right.
know how they grow and what the weight rate should be.
So Doug, it's exactly right. So we've had people who have go to raise litters who it's, maybe their first, second, third time, and they're telling us these puppies are getting thinner and they're not real full, but they nurse 24 hours a day. Well, it's kind of simple, isn't it? Does the mother have milk? And they
Yeah.
don't even realize the mother doesn't have milk, and the puppies are starving to death.
And she's probably not been fed enough either.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Right.
the first time breeder, they need to understand, there's so much to kind of, it's simple and it's right there in front of you, but we don't stop to think about it all, and neither do they always. So it is, that's why things like this are really good to talk
Yeah.
about the first time
I
breeder.
think that it would be great if we could put together a list to post of sort of recommended supplies. I'm really into, taking a supply list to the dog show of, medical emergency and stuff that you need to have just in case. I'm also grateful that I've never had to open the packet when I'm there, but we should always be prepared for an emergency. And what we do is sort of scary, especially if you're new into it. You need to be prepared, or at least have the knowledge to know that something may or could go wrong.
Well, I think even the most experienced breeder, you're going to run into something that maybe you haven't experienced before.
Yeah.
So it's new to you and it's just as scary. So
Right.
I've taken in puppies after, they can lose a little bit of the birth weight after the first day or two, but then after that, they should be gaining. When I've had puppies that weren't. And so I took my puppies and mother in, and I'm like, I need some help. What do we do? And then we need to start supplementing puppies, do this, the whole 9 yards. And I'd never dealt with that before after 15, 20 years. So, you just never know what you're going to run into. And just like
Yeah.
Becky was talking about, be ready to supplement. I've got a thing full of baby bottles. I've got the tubes, and, a real popular method now too is the sponge feeding, which I've used for singleton puppies a few times just to get it in them. After my C-sections, once the puppies are kind of awake and out of that anesthesia, I always have the vet we tube everybody before we even leave. So I know they've got something in them. And I'm not great at tubing. So I'm horrible at tubing. So I'm like, would you please help me? But we'll get all the tubes ready for everybody. And, all of that. Even now I'm an experienced breeder, I still do that every section. It just makes me nervous to get them home.
Right.
Becky, one thing we didn't talk about with the C-section aspect is, do you recommend when the mother, like we always put on a collar on the mother for,
Is
I've
it
lost the
Advil?
word.
Like a calcium
Like
collar?
ADPL.
No, what is, it's a
calm them.
pheromone collar.
The Advil,
Oh,
it comes in a spray.
Adaptil.
Yeah, we use that.
Yeah, Adaptil. Adaptil is a collar that emits a pheromone that's a calming collar, and it is good for mothers that are nervous or that are upset. The first time they came out with that and they mentioned it, one of my skipper key breeders had a litter, and I said, hey, I got this collar as a sample, so take it home and put it on her. And she kept telling me what a good mom she was and all this stuff. Well, after 3-4 weeks, the collar wore off and she wasn't as good a mom. So apparently the collar had made more difference than what we realized. There are vets that send the collar every time they send out a C-section. And I don't know that they all need that, but it is a good product. It's called Adaptil, and it's a collar that's just calming pheromones. Some dogs don't take well to a collar when they have babies, and a lot of us don't keep our dogs collared anyway, but there's also like a infuser that you can use also that could keep them calmer. A lot of times too, when you talk to people, they're not the best mom. It's part of it's the situation. The dog's not well socialized. The dog's not been isolated. The puppies are hungry. The mom's frustrated. There's other parameters, but the collars I have seen them work really well.
And again, we've spoken about this before, and Doug just mentioned it. It's all also about genetics, inherited behavior and character. And those mothers that are great mothers, you keep breeding those, and their daughters will be selectively so too, it seems. And if you have bad mothers, it seems to pass it right on. As a matter of fact, if we don't have bad mothers in Pembrokes, in my opinion. Well, I guess that's all to be considered, but I do remember we used to have in Dobermans, and I worked at a very famous Doberman kennel when I was a kid, and we took those puppies away as quickly as possible if the mother was in these heightened states of awareness and aggression and all of this, because then the puppies ended up being just crazy also. And so and a lot of that is, it's nature nurture, but it's still an issue to consider when you have a very reactive mother that's going to send all those messages, and she jumps up and throws all the puppies off, and they all start screaming every 10 seconds whenever they hear the doorbell ring or the TV or something, or whatever the case. You want to keep them in a quiet area. There's another whole thing we could talk about in one of these future. How do you set up your whelping room? Well, how do you deliver? How do you introduce the puppies to the mother once she's had a C-section? I think it's with some dogs, it's a rather important thing to know how to do that, and what to do and how to let them meet them, and because it can go all wrong just within a couple of minutes. And we can talk about that in the future too. And Antoinelle, the other thing is I much prefer bottle feeding, and the reason I do is I think it's much healthier for the puppies. It also gives them a whole body exercise, you might say, that they wouldn't otherwise get when you're just sticking a tube in their stomach. It helps them digest, in my opinion. I don't know if there's research on it, but helps them digest the food better because they're salivating, they're sucking the milk down like they normally would. It's not just bypassing all of those salivary glands past all those right into the stomach. And so the gestation, I think of, it's better, it's more normal. And that puppy actually learns when their mother does come into milk, how to really be an ambitious sucker, And so all those things I prefer doing with a bottle than I do ever tubing them. But there are some really hardy breeds out there that are just naturally hardy that you can I'm sure can just tube, and they're just as good as they are bottle feeding them. But as Becky mentioned, corgis seem to have more difficulty early on with a lot of different things. And then once you get them past 10 days, you can't kill them. They live forever, and they're like Pekingese almost. But that first 7 days, it's like it's just interesting. But anyway.
So I've actually done both. I've done tube feeding and I've done the sponge feeding, and for different reasons. Like we had this Louchin that was born, and he was 2.5 ounces, and he tried to suckle, but that little thing, he's just like, he couldn't get enough suction. So I would tube him. We tubed him every 2 hours and all this stuff. John took him to work, like literally took his baby to work to tube him. But we also allowed him to suckle as well, because like there's no way you can sit there at a day job and like suckle a little one. But I've also had Swifties where we've had 12 and 13 and there's not enough nipples. And you know what happens when the other ones are suckling and they're not? They start crying. So I soak a bunch of sponges, attach it to the side of my whelping pen. They can suckle, so they're snacking until their litter mates fall off the nipples, and I can stick them on the nipples. Otherwise, it's like these poor puppies are like, I'm hungry. They're eating and I'm not. So
yeah. And so Antoinelle, she also mentioned about big puppies, little puppies, And
Mhm.
so in bottle feeding, there's this age-old thing I learned from some old timers is that what you want to do is, because you do want them to get the colostrum, so you want to try to get them to be on the mother in the first 48 hours, right, Becky? And try to get some colostrum.
It's
from
actually less than that. The sooner they suckle, the better. 3 to 4 hours is probably the prime time, because they start losing the absorption of the colostrum. But I have 2 fed dogs that had a really long distance home, and the puppies weren't going to get any food for 2 or 3 hours, just like you said, Lexa, to get them jump started. But ideally, you want them to nurse from mom as soon as you can. We run into problems too at the veterinary office. I'd love to put the client and the puppies in a room and let them nurse, but we have 7 emergencies. And so sometimes what we can do and what we want to do is not the same thing. Sometimes too, you have puppies that are so weak that they won't suckle, and sometimes you have to tube them part of the time, or I'll let them try to suckle, but if they don't get a decent amount of milk or I don't feel like they're full, then I'll go ahead and tube them. Just to mention a couple of things about the sponge method too. The good thing about the sponge method is sometimes you can get,
Sorry.
bless you. It's okay. Sometimes you can get a puppy to take a sponge where it won't take a nipple, and just to get it started, you need to be sure that the sponges get thrown away each time, because it's almost impossible to sterilize them. And some puppies that are colicky, when they suck the sponge, they get too much air. It also it takes some coordination, because you're trying to hold the puppy, the sponge, and the syringe. So, but sometimes I think when you have those puppies, that's the only way that they'll nurse. It's the best thing.
Right. And so Antonella, what I was going to get at earlier was, if you do start bottle feeding and early on, you do want them to be on the mother as much as possible. And so if the big puppies are bumping the little ones out and they're getting all the colostrum, what we oftentimes do is we take the big puppies and bottle feed them after they've suckled, and then allow the small puppies to be on the mother for as long as possible. Because what you want to do is take those big fat ones, feed them first so they go into their little milk comas, so those skinny ones can get on and get the colostrum also. So it's just another little thing to think about, but it helps and it works, and it's something that a new person wouldn't think about, you know?
Well, I think the other important thing to say here is that you really need to check the temperature, with your hand, whatever, of your puppies, because if they're cold, they can't, in this, right, Becky, they can't
Right.
digest the food. You can't feed
Yeah.
a cold puppy. You could,
Yeah.
if you're trying to tube or whatever, shove that food down, you could really hurt that puppy or kill that, they can't digest if they're cold. So I'm in there constantly checking, just touching them by touch, their body temperature. A lot of times, the mother should be able to maintain, but sometimes they can't. So, that's when a lot of breeders will put in an extra heat source or whatever, because it's like Dr. Becky said, they'll die more of being cold than of being hungry, because
So I
they
have a
can't
question.
digest the food.
Out of curiosity, because this is a broad spectrum question, is, so what temperature do you keep a thermometer in your whelping box, and what temperature do you keep your whelping box? And I do that, and I'm always curious what other people keep their nest at, you might say. Do you know?
So if I'm using just the heat pad, it's like 88 on the heat pad, but I also have an incubator I keep at 90. So I have both.
Right. Excellent. Yeah.
And if the puppies hate it, I just take it away.
I
Yeah.
create a tent situation, since my whelping box is on the floor, for drafts and everything. So I'll put an X pin around and a sheet, so it kind of keeps everything warm in there. And then I have a light. It's not so much for heat, it's so I can see in the middle of the night what's going on in there. And then I do have a heating pad that I will put on one side, and my mothers usually end up laying on it because they like it too. But that way the puppies can kind of crawl on or crawl off, depending. And sometimes I even have those little warmers you can pop in the microwave. So once I get them on the mom, I'll kind of shove them in there so they can't roll, crawl away or any of those things.
Also a good thing to take with you to the vet when you're having a C-section.
Yes, I do that a lot.
Yeah.
Or I have some rice and socks and those kind of things, just water bottles, just kind of depends. But dachshund puppies are really, really tough. It takes a lot to get rid of them. And usually if they're gone by day 3 or 4, then something was wrong on the inside that you couldn't see. But they're pretty resilient. You can beat them up pretty good and still get them to live. So, But yeah, that's kind of what I do. But I've also burned puppies out of the box. So I just have to, being really careful with what I
Mhm.
put in there and where it's located in the box so everybody can get away from the heat as well as find the heat.
Right, good point, excellent point. Get away from the heat as well as find it.
Yeah.
And they do too, if they need it, they head
They'll
for
find it.
And so Becky, also, don't puppies present themselves with odd colored stools if they're not digesting the food early on and they have low body temperatures, or they can't control those temperatures, or?
Or they'll
This
have
was a
little
learning.
holes inside or something in the stool.
The seeds are normal. It's coagulated milk. So, and a lot of times people panic when they see them because the mom's doing such a good job that you don't see all the poop all the time. And normal puppy poop is like soft serve ice cream. Veterinarians use food analogies all the time, but the little seeds are normal. It's just digested milk. The only thing is that if it looks like the milk, if you're supplementing and it looks like what's coming out is like yellow colored clotted milk, it means two things. Either the puppy's being over supplemented, which some puppies are pigs, they'll drink too much. The other thing it can mean is the puppies are cold. So if their gastrointestinal is not at temperature, they won't digest the food. And we had some older puppies that had some stool that looked like that. And I just assumed we were over supplementing, but another veterinary breeder friend, she goes like, no, she goes, check their temperature. And sure enough, that temperature, the puppy was 94, which
What's a
puppies can be
normal temperature
98.
for 98?
98, 97 is okay. 94 is too cold. And if they're doing poorly, warmer is better. Not too warm. You can't put them in the incubator at 100, but warmer is better when they're not doing well.
Yeah, and Antonella, if you're going to supplement your puppies, there's another thing, is it's better to supplement your puppy with less volume and more frequently than it is to do them less frequently with huge volume, because you'll end up, what's that, when the fluid goes in their lungs, if you overfeed them, it's when they aspirate. And it's a very common thing with early on breeders who do that with their puppies, and it causes all kinds of problems then, from pneumonia to other things, huh, Becky?
Yeah. If you're not sure, do it under. And sometimes when you're doing it in the middle of the night, and you've been doing it every 2 hours, I count the number of times they swallow, because it's just too easy to kind of zone off and not realize the puppy's overeaten.
Next time I see you, Antonella, I'll show you a technique that we do. And one of it's just to lay the puppy across the palm of your hand. And so the head's towards the thumb. And so your back finger and your palm has the stomach of that puppy in your hand. And you can feel the pressure build as you bottle feed them. And you just want to stop when it gets a little taut. You don't want to make it tight. That's the bad thing. So you can just kind of indicate that with the palm of your hand and the back of your fingers while you're bottle feeding them. So it's a good thing to do while you are doing it. But next time I see you, I'll show you.
Well, and depending on your bottle too, they can still suck in air. So I like to stop every once in a while and burp them. Just, rub, if you right behind the rib, you rub that stomach, and you can feel the air come out. And then, and check the air in your bottle too. Because they will bring in the air and they get
angle. Yeah, absolutely. You always do it at an angle up. You don't help at level or down is bad. Always with an angle up. Yeah. So the bottle's in the bottom of the bottle. The fluid's in the bottom of the bottle.
Yeah.
I'll get it out there eventually.
Well, can you talk about temperature on bottle feeding newborns too? Because the milk temperature is very important.
Yeah, go ahead. You're good.
Okay, so when you're first off, let me say that I am good at getting puppies on a bottle, but Bill's even better. So just know that. And it takes a little bit of stubbornness and a little bit of determination. And sometimes you'll work on a puppy for a while and then you'll put it in the box and work on another, and then you pick that puppy up again, and all of a sudden it realizes it's really hungry. But the temperature of the milk is really important. So when you're starting out, if the milk is cold, they won't take it. And if they won't take it, they won't take the bottle, because you tried to kill me with that thing a while ago, so you're not going to do it again. So the temperature of the milk when you're bottle feeding needs between 95 and 100. That means you need a really good cooking thermometer. And when you heat it up, you don't want to overheat it because it denatures the protein in the milk. So you'll kind of figure out what works with your microwave. Or a lot of times we'll just keep a hot, we'll get it at the right temperature with the microwave, but then we'll put it in a bowl of hot water to keep it warm while we're feeding. But if you try to start out a newborn puppy with a bottle that's too cold, you won't have much success getting them to take the bottle ever, because that one thing they'll remember in their little head is that you tried to kill them with that cold stuff. So that's a consideration too.
Well, they
Excellent.
just usually don't like cold things, even the first few weeks of their life. Even with rice cereal or whatever, I always warm it up because they just don't like cold.
We have
Yeah,
a
they
double
don't.
boiler for that. We just keep it in the dog's bathroom.
Great.
But also in Minnesota, it's always cold here, except for like a month in the summer.
Isn't there a supplement that you can give them to start to produce their milk?
Yes.
There's several things that we can use. The most common thing we use is we give them metoclopramide, which is a smooth muscle stimulant because the muscle in the mammary gland is smooth muscle. We also use it for vomiting. So a lot of times you'll have it for something else anyway. And it's just the regular dose for an upset stomach. And then you take the oxytocin injection and you use it as nose drops. You have to do it every 2 hours. And you have to do it until they're lactating well. But because our breed almost always sadly needs a C-section, we do it almost all the time. There's another supplement that's a horse supplement that helps get them to lactate. And I never get the name of it right, and I wasn't prepared, but I'll have it for next time. It sounds something like Dom Perignon, but it's not what it
It does. It
is.
sounds like champagne. Dom Perignon. Yeah. And so if you tell your vet you went Dom Perignon, they know exactly what you're talking about because everyone ever says it right. Yeah. Yeah. But it's an excellent product. Really excellent.
I've used fenugreek.
And you might,
Have you ever heard of that, Becky?
yeah, fenugreek is I practice acupuncture, so I know all that weird stuff.
Okay.
Fenugreek is actually an Indian spice, but it's also been used historically to encourage lactation for decades, and it does help. It smells really good too, and even if they don't need the supplement, they tend to like it in their food. But you just buy the capsules they use for people, and you give them one twice a day.
Yeah, that's what I've
And
been
it's
giving.
like it's spelled, it's fenugreek. But if you have one that's not enough, or she kind of had milk and then she had the C-section and you brought her home and she just doesn't have it, those other compounds are very effective. And a lot of vets don't know that because
Yeah.
everything we do in reproduction is extra label, so
Dr.
it's not
Becky.
approved for that.
I know we're going over here. Oh, do you have a question, Antoinette?
I'm good right now. I think,
Oh, I was just going to say one other thing, Becky, that we didn't talk about during delivery is when a puppy does present itself and it's there and it's not coming out, you need to go to the vet, right? Right.
Yeah, if it's there, or if there's any part of it that you can grab either behind the neck or over the hip bones, sometimes you can help it out because by the time you get the half in and out of a puppy to the vet, the puppy's gonna be dead. So
It backs up the others.
yeah, but you can save the others by doing that. And also just to keep in mind, if you ever get in one of those places where the puppies, like there's a bulge under the rectum, but there's not enough puppy that you can hang on to, put a glove on and go in rectally. And sometimes when the mom pushes, you can hold it still so it doesn't slide back and forth because you're not in the same cavity that the puppy is where you're trying to grab. But that can make all the difference in the world.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. Yes. All right. So we've covered a lot of information here and even got into some of the delivery stuff that we're going to say for another program. But I don't know. Does anyone
That'll give
else?
me time to go to the welcome kit and take pictures and make a list.
Yeah. And maybe by the next thing, we'll have a whelping kit list ready. Like you mentioned, Doug, we'll try to put one together perhaps so we can, yeah.
I have
I
a
think
craft
that'll be
kit.
yeah.
I have
Well,
a
I
list
think
as
that'll be
well, so
good to
maybe we can
post.
email and collaborate on our lists.
Yeah,
I
because
will-
there's different things, and I learned stuff too from other people. Once I was talking about having a litter and fighting with a thermometer, and the next day on my desk was there's a beautifully wrapped package, and it was a pool thermometer. That was kind of pre the digital things that we have now. But she goes, "Yeah, just get a pool thermometer. They're almost indestructible." I'm like, "Why didn't I think of that?" There's this cute little pool thermometer with a duck on the end, and the little tiny puppies weren't going to bite into it because it's got a plastic shield about it. But it's like, well, you're brilliant, and I'm not.
Yeah, and it
So,
can just lay in the bottom of the whelping box and then you know the temperature
Yeah.
no matter where it is. Yep. And it's easily cleaned. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
I use
Yeah.
it's
an
meant to be
infrared.
watertight.
Wow, infrared. That's
Yeah, I
because
just have,
you
we
stated
have them all
that.
over the house. We just get the infrared and
Oh my
It's
God.
for your
course you
guests.
do.
It's when your guests come, you don't want them to have a temperature, right?
Well, that and also like I'm doing a lot of temperature on the windows and the doors because I'm putting fleece over them. I mean, we're like -6 this morning, so just trying to create thermal barriers and stuff in the house.
Yeah, no, I think it's great.
Also, even just, if we post to the group and just tell people that they should invest in a scale to weigh their puppies and keep
Mhm.
track of that. That is not necessarily in the whelping box list, but definitely something like on the beginner breeder
Mhm.
must-have list, something
You
like
know,
that.
it should be in your whelping box kit. And
It
you
should
know, Antonella, you should keep the ledger, get a good ledger, and you'll refer to that in the future. As you have future generations, you'll like say to yourself, where were my 5-week-old puppies last time? How much did they weigh? And you can just go back and go, oh my God, they only weighed this much, And the interesting thing I found, and I'm sure the other breeders on this, it's a very simple thing, but you'll have little puppies. Somebody mentioned having a 3 or 4 or 5 ounce puppy. I've had those. And then
2.5.
they're in the same litter with the 13-ounce ones.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? They're all pre-genetically disposed to a certain size, right? And that 5-ounce puppy can end up bigger, way bigger than that 13-ounce puppy when they're done growing. Isn't that amazing? You always think, oh, it's the little runt. It's always going to be a little runt and all this. And then they grow up to be this gigantic thing, Yeah, it's amazing how they can. And it's interesting because at certain ages, those puppies all I don't want to say neutralize, well, they all reach the same weight. And there's small ones and big ones, and then they all kind of reach the same weight. And then the other ones start growing faster and other ones slow down. It's just all, that book will be really interesting to you, that ledger.
Well, and what I do is each new litter gets a folder. So the temperature chart of the mother, when I start checking temperature before we get ready, is in there. The weight chart is in there. If I did a AI or TCI or anything, that goes in there. Anything about that, a pedigree, I always put a copy of the pedigree in there. So I'm looking, and I keep that. And so for 20 years, I have that. So if I want to go back and look at my first or second litter, I've got that information in that folder. But everybody gets a temperature chart. Everybody.
I love you for that pedigree thing, because that's really cool. Because if you're not good at keeping it in your mind, you can look at that pedigree and go, I forgot that is a dominant source in that family of dogs right there that I always thought caused this,
And on my
think
pedigrees, it has the pictures of the parents up top, and then it has the pedigree of that breeding down below, so that I can look at those puppies and go, oh, interesting.
I love that.
Can we hire you to fix our records?
Yeah, I love all that stuff. I love organization and pictures and pedigrees. I'm very A-type personality, OCD about it. So
I love it. No, we need that. And you guys, just a couple of ideas for other sessions. I think what Doug said about the first aid kit at the dog show, we actually have a first aid kit that we put together that we send with people, and it's kind of breed dependent because of the dosage, but you'd be amazed. And a lot of times we're not the one using it. It's some other exhibitor that's gotten into trouble and needs something from the emergency kit. But we have a list of things, and we have a kit that we actually resell for that. And so I think that that's really important. I also think you could do a whole session on different ways to keep records for dogs, which I'm real behind right now. So I think that would be helpful for us. But I think those are other things that you could speak or talk about.
You mean documenting breeding records?
Yeah, just all that stuff. Whelping records, puppy records. A lot of my clients, yeah, or even just puppy books, because new breeders, our puppy books are pretty extensive, but it took me a long time to figure that out. So a lot of times new breeders need to know what they need to send with their puppies. And then I'll be online and see something that's like, well, why didn't I ever think of that? So there's a lot of information there too.
Well, it's like Bill said, I love to see how people have their whelping rooms set up, or their puppy raising rooms, or, how they do their puppy swag, or, whatever they send, those kind of things. I think it's neat. So
that could also be a really fun interactive thing for our Facebook page, like show us your whelping room or show us your whelping box, like what their setup is. So we're like interacting with them and just kind of, looking at what different people with different breeds do. And
show us your whelping kit. Yeah.
That'd be amazing.
My whelp, I think you all can see this. This thing, like we have everything in tubs, but what happened is I was gone.
It's all about but everything's
all-
blurry but you.
Your blur, yeah,
I'm-
your
I will
background.
There it
unblurry
is.
that.
It's not
But I
blurry
went to a show and I wasn't home and we had a puppy crash. It actually ended up having a liver shunt anyways. It was actually a puppy we were raising for somebody else.
Mm.
And John couldn't find all the tools, even though I have them in boxes everywhere. How do I unblur this?
But we can see the box now.
You
Oh,
just have to hold
good.
it up.
But everything is labeled. I mean, you can't really read it, but
Hold
it's
it
all
close to your
completely
face.
labeled.
Hold it closer to your face. Then it comes into, oh yeah. it didn't
So
focus.
blurry, Jenny.
Aw.
Fix this.
Aw.
She's very
Yeah.
protective of her
It's
kid.
for another time.
Yes,
Right. Oh, there it is. Can
Yeah,
y'all
there
see
you
that
go.
now?
yes.
It has every single thing you need. It's all
Oh, yeah.
labeled.
Oh,
It's-
nice.
That way, when you have to
I'm a
run to the
failure.
vet, I've just had a lot of emergencies. Lots. Like I had that one puppy born with the intestines on the outside. Saved
know-
them. Saved them.
Doug,
Yeah,
with
that's
everything in
amazing because that's a midline. That's a big deal.
Doug, with
I-
everything in that
yeah,
kit,
that's
she
great.
has a video to go with it.
No
do.
doubt.
Mm.
Mhm.
But everything's organized by like, whelping, stitching, like everything's in here. Or I even have a bloat part in here. So, but the
Oh,
entire
I
bloat
love
kit's
that.
somewhere else. Yeah. I like organization.
I do too. That like soothes my soul a lot. Makes me feel really warm on the inside.
Okay, I'm ready to go to dinner, so.
Excellent.
All
So,
right.
Becky, thank you so much for being with us. And then our next session is set up at Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Central. We can continue this fabulous conversation.
Mhm.
And I'm glad Becky will be back with us because I have some more questions.
Yeah.
I
Becky,
think
I
you said
think you're-
it says 6:30 in the did you say 6:30?
6:30.
Okay,
Central.
all right.
And
All
thank
right,
you,
I'll be
Becky.
there.
I'm finding this.
And in the meantime, I'll get these videos sliced up and get them ready for our YouTube stuff and can get these ready to be put out next week.
Yay.
Great.
And Ellen and I will inventory the whelping boxes.
Yeah,
Well,
let's do
thank
you.
that. I've got a list as well. So can we create either like a new Google document or email each other or something? Maybe we can, the Google Doc would be good, Jenny, and we can kind of collaborate on that. I'm really interested to see what everybody has and
Yeah, it'll be good information to put out there for beginners and for any level of breeder. So
Yeah.
And the other
There
thing
may
I've been
be-
I have a
Mm.
Ziploc bag with 2 forceps and some dental floss.
that's because you C-section everything.
Yeah.
Just section
And
the-
and a set of keys.
You know what I started doing
Got
is
his
letting
snacks
Excellent.
and coffee on the way to the vet.
y'all are
Right.
bad.
Yeah,
I started
Starbucks
letting people
card.
borrow my stuff. Like they can come and take the entire kit, the whelping box, because I have spares, and the what's that thing? The incubator. Because I'm like, I don't use it
I like
24/7. And here's what I use for umbilical cords now: the clips. I love them. Because these puppies are big and they keep like flailing all over the place and trying to run away. And I'm like, dude, you're still attached to your bag. Like,
Show us
Or
that
dental-
again.
dental
What you
floss.
use.
dental floss now.
But
Show
you
us
know
again.
what? Even if you do that cord, my mothers are horrible about cords if I'm not careful. Even if I take my hemostat to clip it off, and they'll clip it off so close to the body that I can't even
Yeah.
get dental floss around. It makes me really nervous.
I won't clip this close to the body. I clip it like away and I clip the bag off and throw it away. Then I do the dental. Otherwise, the entire bag is still stuck to the butt. And they're just, I mean, they're very active when they're born. So I'm like, well, I got to get rid of the bag and then deal with the actual umbilical cord. But at least this will stop the bleeding for the time being.
Because my
But
mother
we've had some,
take those
like,
cords.
have-
Even if
We
I
don't
chop
let
it
'em-
off and it's a beautiful and it looks
don't-
great, they'll still going after the cord. I'm
No,
like, stop,
those
leave it
don't.
alone.
What were
Dachshund.
you gonna say, Becky?
I think she does it too, but we grab the puppy as soon as it's born, clean it up, get it going, weigh it, tie off the cord, and then give it to the mom. But they will sometimes chew it short again.
Mhm.
So I'm a little bit better than mom's teeth, so we do it ourselves.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I actually do whelp the English toys, and when they come out, we clear the sack, clamp the cord, cut the cord, and then tie it off.
Yep, that's what
Yeah.
we do.
That's what we do.
But I do
And
let the
then-
mother eat the placenta.
That's what I usually do.
I
is
just-
While I'm more taking the puppy and I've clamped off the cord and cut it, let the mom deal with the placenta so I can take the baby.
Yeah.
It'll keep her busy too.
Yeah.
It's-
It'll